So now, let me just go to Eclipse, and then you can create a new file maybe if you want to follow my solution. Let me shut the lights. Okay, just make sure it's really recording. Okay, stop recording. Good. Okay, so I'm going to now go into week 2, lab 2. Okay, that's where the take-home exercise should go into. Okay, I'm going to create a new class over here. So new class, I'll just call it compute text. Let's say if you got it already, you can call that compute text too. And then main method. Okay. Okay, first of all, let's do the usual stuff. We have to declare our scanner objects. So let's do that first. So we have to say scanner and input equals new scanner and system.in. Okay. Okay, let's see. We should say enter your name. So prompt the user for their name. System.out.println. Enter your name. And then we're going to say string name is assigned to input.next line. Okay, that one should be no surprise to you. And now, from now on, we can actually use the variable here to customize the message. Okay, so now we're going to prompt the user for their filing status, which can be either 1 or 2. So in which case, we have to read the integer from the user. So you say system.out.println. Okay, so here you're going to say, for example, the name, for example, Jim, and with a comma here. Enter your filing status, and of course, we're going to make it more detailed. If you like, you can split this into several lines if you like. So what I can do is this. I'll just put a variable here and system.out.println. Okay? And then I can even split it further if I like into filing status. And then I'm going to put a detail over here. Out. As far as the console output is concerned, they are really the same. Okay, and then I'm going to say one would be single filing. Okay, don't forget the parentheses over here. Would be single filing, and also 2 would be married filing. Okay, that's good. And don't forget about semicolon over here. Okay, so we got 2 prints and 1 print line. Okay, it's going to be 1 single line to be printed to the console. Okay, so now we're going to, once we get the, so we're going to read the filing status. So we're going to be, it's going to be integer. So filing, I'll just say status. It's going to be input.nextInt. Okay. So now next one would be we have to enter your taxable income. Okay. So now, okay, from the user for their taxable income. So now we're gonna have system.out.println Jim, for example, comma, enter your taxable income. Okay, colon. So there's no need to actually split it into several prints. And then we're going to read it. So for the taxable income, let's simply assume the income is going to be integer. Or if there has to be a double number, I'll be explicit in the test or in the quiz. Okay, let's say integer income is equal to input.nextInt. Okay, so far so good. Okay, now we are going to do something here. Okay, first of all, let's check to see. Oh, there's something to note. There's something I forgot. Okay, if you look at the sample output there, if somehow they enter some number for the filing status, that's not neither 1 nor 2. Then you have to output the error already. So what I would say is the following. So after this one here, we actually already have to check to see what's really the file status before we move on to ask them about the taxable income, right? So we can say that if you simply say things like there are several ways to do this. Let me show you one way. If the status happens to be 1, then we're going to do some calculation here. Else if the status can be equal to 2, okay, and then we can do something there as well. Otherwise, this would be an error. That's one way. Okay. So now, in the case where the status is equal to 1, we have to first prompt the user. Let me show you something here, and then I'll show you why you have to make some improvement. So now, in the case where the status is equal to 1, we have to first prompt the user for their taxable income before we can proceed to actually calculate the income, the tax. Similarly, we also have to do the same for the case where the status is equal to 2. Right? Okay, but now we can see there's some disadvantage here because we are repeating the same prompt message and also the same reading from the user. Okay, somehow it would be nice if we can somehow combine these into 2. Okay, so there are several ways of doing it since we already learned the logical operator today. So let's see how we can use it. Okay, so I'm going to show you different ways of doing it. Okay. So now, if you say, what about this? If status is equal to 1 or status is equal to 2, I'm going to do the following. Tell me something. Would it be right if I say that? What's wrong with that? I can tell you that's wrong. Why? Yeah, exactly. The number can only be just one single value, right? So if you say status equals 1 and status equals 2, it's always going to evaluate to false. So this is just another example to show you. When you use a conjunction, always be careful not to have something that will always evaluate to false. Okay. So this one wouldn't work. So you have to use the disjunction. And I will put some comments for you. Do not use status equals 1 or status equals 2. Oh, sorry, and. Because it always evaluates to false. Okay, so this is one way to write it if you want to write using disjunction. There is also a way to write it using conjunction, to say the status should be in the range between 1 and 2. Okay, that's also possible. Let me put that in comments, but you can also try that. We can also write the range using conjunction. Okay, something like this. You can say 1 is less than or equal to status, and status is less than or equal to 2. That will also work. Okay, so maybe you can compare these two alternative ways to write the ranges. So you should really get yourself familiar to both of them. Okay, so that's really the power of logical operators. So you can really specify many possibilities at the same time, rather than using several if or else if branches. Okay, good. So now, let's now go on. So in the case where, remember now, again, we can apply our logical laws, right, from today. So now implicitly, it is not the case that status equals 1 or status equals 2. And remember from our lecture today, we said this should be equal to, not the case status equals 1 and not the case status equals 2. Agree? Okay, that's what the law actually tells you. Okay, I'll write it down for you. Okay, certainly you can study the notes later, but I just want to tell you. Let me put it here so it's easier. Okay, that is status not equals 1 and status not equals 2. Which means if we can manage to reach the else part, that means the status is neither 1 or 2. Of course, that should be an error. Any questions up to now? Are we okay? Good. So now, in the case where there's an error, so you're going to say something here. You'll say system.out.println. Okay, we should say illegal status. Illegal status. Okay, of course that should be with the and then we'll say colon here and plus status. And because we actually declare the status outside the if statements, so that's why its scope can be applied to each of the branches. Okay, you can also review the slides on that part. Okay, so now we are basically done with the error parts. Now we're going to go for the case where the status is either 1 or 2. Okay. So now we have read the income from the user already. So now when you're developing your code, you should really try your software as soon as it's sensible to try. Okay? You don't really have to wait until the last stage to try your software. For now, since I'm done with the case where there's an error, so why don't I just give it a try? If I try that, enter your name, Jim, enter a firing status, so far so good. If I say 0, for example, it is going to tell me the right message. So I'm already testing my software. One more. So let's say Jim and then 3. Okay, that's also good. Okay, let me go on. Okay, so now we're going to calculate the text in 2 different ways, depending on what your status is. So now if the status is equal to 1, okay, and now let me ask you this. This one requires a little bit of thinking. What is the implicit condition here? So I have the if statements there, saying status should be equal to 1. If that's the case, I'll use the left column in the table to calculate the taxable income. But now, when I say in the else part, typically you would simply say, well, status will not be equal to 1. But in this case, it's something that's more to that. So what does it really mean? When I say status is not equal to 1, what will happen in the else part? Give you hints here. Look at line number 21. Because now we are in a very special context over here. We can reach here. We can reach here simply because the if condition in line number 21 was true. So the status should be line number 21. So status is either 1 or 2. Only 2 possibilities here. So now here we are talking about the first possibility. If it is not 1, then it's going to be 2. There's no third possibility. We know this simply because line number 21. Okay, I'll write it down for you. Implicit status is equal to 2. This is because from line 21, we have only 2 possible values for status, 1 or 2. Okay? So that means in here, in the if branch here, we can use the case where status equals 1 to calculate. And the else part we can use when status equals 2 to calculate. Okay. Okay, let's try to see what we can do. Okay, in the case where status is equal to 1, so we have to say if, so now we have to just divide that into different ranges, right? So we have to say if the income we're talking about is less than or equal to 8350, then we gotta calculate one way, okay? Then somehow the we have part. I'm gonna do the most naive way to show you, and then to see how we can factor it out later. Okay, so we're gonna have part 1 is equal to income times, so it's going to be 10%. Okay, because that's strictly less than that. So whatever income you have, you're going to pay that much tax. Okay. So now, else if, so now if your income is actually somehow greater than 8,000, whatever this number is, but it's still smaller than or equal to 33950. 33950. In this case, okay, so you're going to say, again, you have part 1, part 2, and part 3. Part 1 is equal to A350. Okay, it's going to be the full range of that first part. Okay, and double part 2 is going to be equal to your income minus the 8350 and then times 0.15%. Okay, so far so good. If you read the question, that's basically what the question is saying. Okay. Very good. So now, let me go further. Otherwise, if your income is strictly larger than that, then you're going to get, of course, double part 1 is equal to something like this. 8350 times 0.1 and double part 2 is equal to, so for that one you're going to get to see that number there, 33950 minus 8350 multiplied by, okay, finally you also have part 3 to see whatever you exceed that range there. It's going to be your income minus 33950 times 25%. Okay, that should be part 3, of course. Okay, agree so far? Okay, so now I'm going to do status 2 in a moment because it's going to be very similar. Okay, so now I would like to do the following. In the case where we have part 1, let's say we're going to say things like this. System, so we're going to say which filing status we are talking about. System.out.println. Okay, you had to say something like calculation is based on the scheme of single filing. And of course, this line is needed for all the branches. Okay, already you can see lots of duplication here, but I just want to do the most naive version first. And then I'll show you how to simplify that. Okay, that's one. And then we're going to say how much they have to pay. Okay. Okay, so now first of all, we say system.out.println the name, for example, Jim. You should pay $, and that would be just part 1. Okay, if you like, you can do the following. You can just declare another variable, let's say text, is equal to part 1 only in this case. So you can put text. Okay. Something similar I'm going to do for other branches. So let me just copy here. So after part 1 and part 2 in the second branch, now the text will be equal to part 1 plus part 2. Okay. Similarly, so here we'd say part 1 plus part 2 plus part 3, like that. Okay, let me just double check. Okay, I haven't got the code for status 2 yet, but I can already test the status 1 branch. If I run this program here, let's say Jim and then 1, let's say I would like to do 1864 and then 76. Okay, the number seems to be correct, but I just forgot to break down. Let me do that again. Let me do that. Okay, I need to break down as well. That's something I forgot. Okay, so now after the calculation, I would say, for example, in the first branch over here, so I would say system.out.println. So here I would say part 1 is this amount, part 1, okay? And then I'm going to copy this line here, and the next range is going to include part 1 and part 2. Part 1 and also part 2. Okay, and now let's do another version here. So now after that, we're going to say part 1, part 2, and part 3. Of course, you have to fix that over here. 1, 2, 3. Okay, also here, 1 and 2. And here, just part 1. Okay, everyone follow so far? Okay, I'm just trying to do that. Okay, let me just test one more time. Okay, enter your name, Jin 1. Okay, and then we have 1A6476. 1A6476. Okay, that looks correct. Okay, so the program seems to be correct. Okay, so now let me just finish the rest of the finish also status 2 in a very similar way. So I'm just going to copy and paste, and then to fix the corresponding ranges and calculation. Okay, so now if you are following me, so please just copy this part here. So under status equals 1, we're gonna copy if, else, if, and else. Copy this part here. Okay. If you don't quite follow, you can still follow the video. Okay, it's completely recorded. Okay. So now I'm going to copy this branch here, and then I'm going to paste it here. Okay, so now I'm going to fix the corresponding ranges. So now for the Mary filing status, the first cutting point should be 16,700. 16,700. Okay, so now you're going to have the calculation is based on the scheme of married filing. Okay, married. So I'll just fix all the 3 married. Okay. Now I'm going to see. Okay, 16,700 and then 67,900. 67,900. Okay, so now let me see. Okay, have income. So this part is okay. And now for this part here, it's going to be 16,700. And then to see whatever that exceeds, 16,700, and it's going to be 15%. That's good. And then part 1 and part 2. And now I'm going to fix this one as well. 16,700. And then I have 16,900 and 16,700. Okay, that'll be the 15%. And now finally, that'll be the 67,900. Okay. So now that's done. So can I just test very quickly to see? Jin, let's say married file in this case, I'm gonna try the same number here. So it'll be 18, 64, 76. So that looks correct. Okay, I'm lucky this time. You can see I did lots of copy and paste. So you can see I was being very careful. Okay, but you can follow the video and see it. So now this program looks correct, but we have a saying to say. So I would say, why don't we just leave the class like it is? We're going to create a new one. Okay, and then we will fix a new one. So you got 2 versions to compare. So I think that'll be even nicer. Let me give you some comments here. So we say the code below smells in the sense that we got lots of duplication. You can see we actually have to declare. By the way, so if you see that in this if branch here, we declare part1 and text. In this branch here, we also declare part1 and text. As I said in the lecture today, it was totally okay because the scope are completely independent. So that's why you can do it. Okay, but you can see we are declaring lots of variables with the same name but in different scope. That's one duplication. And also, we are also trying to declare, trying to repeat like a gym, you should pay how much, and also the file scheme message, and also part 1, part 2, part 3, etc. Lots of duplication here. Okay, so we would like to have a way to minimize the number of print statements and also calculation as much as possible. That's why I said minimize. So you can reduce the smell of your code. Okay. Okay, let's do the following. Can we just create another version? So maybe new class. Maybe in your case, you can call it compute text 3, since the first version will be your own version. So compute text. In my case, I'll just say that 2. Okay. And then we also have a main method there. Okay. So now I'm going to show you how we can fix that to have a much simpler code. Okay. So now, first of all, let me start with the really smelly code. So I can just copy from the first line, from scanner decoration, until the last line over there. Okay, let me just make sure that's really, okay, only until here. Okay, because this is closing the main method. This is closing the class. So just make sure you copy the right thing. Let me go back to compute text 2. Just paste that. Still compiles, just exactly the same class. So now let's see how we can improve the matter. So apparently you can see for all the possible all the possible ranges and all the possible statuses, we got 6 possible combinations, right? For status 1, you got range 1, range 2, and range 3. For status 2, you also got 3 ranges. We got 6 possibilities. For each possibility there, you kind of need part 1, part 2, and part 3. It's just that sometimes maybe part 1 maybe might be 0, and sometimes part 2 might be 0. Sometimes part 3 might be 0 as well. Okay, depends. So we would like to do the following. So let's say here, let me just delete this comment here. Don't quite need that. Okay, so I would suggest the following to say double part 1, double part 2, and double part 3. So somehow I want to make the scope of part 1, part 2, and part 3 not very specific to either of the branches. It's going to be global to all the branches. So somehow we can just do the reassignments if needed. Okay. So let's say initially that will simply be 0, and simply be 0, and that will simply be 0. Which means, let's say, if one person's income is actually rather low, so you wouldn't really get to the second or third range. So in that case, part 2 and part 3 will remain to be 0. Okay, so we'll see. Okay, so now I would like to do the following. So now we can simply just update part 1 here. And also, let's forget about text for now. We're going to do that in a moment. Okay? And also, we're going to need this. Okay, this message here, I'm going to put that so we can have if status equals 1. Otherwise, let me show you where to put it. Okay, if status equals 1, otherwise status equals 2, right? So now I'm going to put it right over here. Okay, so let me show you where to put it. Okay, let me just give you a big picture. So over there we said if status equals 1 or status equals 2. Okay, so over here, of course, this will be else, the error. That's the error. So the big picture is, so now we would say if the status is equal to 1 and we do something there. Of course, we got the if else branches here. Otherwise, this is the case where the status is actually equal to 2. Okay, so the place to put those codes will be here, which means this is the part that is common to both branches, which means we're going to execute this block of code no matter what for both branches. If you happen to be in status 1, you're also going to execute this block of code to report. If you happen to be in status 2, you also have to execute this block of code to report. Okay, that's the idea. Okay, let's see how I would do it. Okay, so now I'm going to do the following. I'm also going to need a string variable here. So let me also declare double text, also equal to 0 for now. Also string, let's say filing. Okay, kind of filing status. So now, okay, so now when status equals 1, so we know that we are talking about a single filing status. So I'm going to assign filing to be equal to single for now. Okay. Similarly, in the case where I can get rid of this comment here, the filing is going to be assigned to married. Okay, over here. So now we're getting there. Although we got some compile time error, but we're getting there. So now we got part 1 equals that. Okay, so now we just don't need to redeclare the variable, and now we don't need the text, just part 1 and part 2, and get rid of that. It's much simpler now. Okay, as you will see. And for this part here, only need part 1, part 2, and part 3. Don't need the text, and don't need this either. Okay, you can see we are only concentrating on part 1, on the part that's not 0. Okay, part 1. So in the case where the income is too low, we only care about part 1. In the case if the income is slightly higher, but not the highest, you will worry about part 1 and part 2. In the case where the income is really the highest, you'll get part 1, part 2, and part 3. Okay. So now, similarly, so only part 1 here, and now we don't need that part. So now only part 1 and part 2. Don't need that. Don't need that. Part 1, part 2, part 3, and get rid of all of that. Okay. So now the code compiles, but we still got some work to do. Okay, not yet. We're getting there. So now, so here, for example, Jim, you should pay text. So now, how do we calculate the text? Let me do maybe let me declare this text variable at the end. That might be easier. So you can say double text equals part 1 plus part 2 plus part 3. So I only need one single formula to calculate the text. Part 1, part 2, and part 3. Let's see why this works. Remember over here we initialize part 1, part 2, and part 3 to be 0. And we only reassign the relevant parts to be non-zero when necessary. And always we're going to calculate part 1, part 2, plus part 3 altogether. In the case where there's no part 2 or part 3, it will be 0 anyway, so there's no effects when you add them up. Okay, so now let's just give you one example here. So now let's say here, if the income in a single filing status is less than or equal to 8350, in this case, we only worry about the part 1 being non-zero. For part 2 and part 3, it's going to be 0 anyway. So it doesn't matter if you add them up to the part 1. Okay, so similarly, so here we only care about part 1 and part 2. And part 3 actually remains to be 0 over here, right? Because it was simply not reassigned. Okay, and here we do set up part 1, part 2, and part 3 to be non-zero. In that case, this formula, you can see it can be applied to all the branches, really. Anyone follow? Kind of following, right? Yeah. I will certainly make this code available to you, so you don't actually have to. You can still follow the video to type it, but I'll also make it available. Okay, So now it's going to, okay, so now in the common part, calculation is based on the scheme of, so this is where the usefulness of the string variable comes. So of plus filing plus filing over here. So of, so depending on how we set the variable to be, it can be married or it can be single, right? Can be single filing, can be married filing. Okay. Okay, so now one more. Part 1 is always non-zero, so we should always print out part 1. But part 2 and part 3 might be 0, in which case we don't have to print them out. So now we can say if part 2 happens to be greater than 0, in this case, we have to print out part 2. Part 2 and part 2. And similarly, so now tell me something. Here, should I put else if or just if? Because somehow part 2 and part 3, they're completely independent, right? So if you somehow put else if here, that means if the part 2 happens to be non-zero, then you will actually skip this part already. Okay, so that's why we have to put just if. So two complete independence. Okay, so now let's try again this program here and see. Jim, and then let's say 1, and then 1864, 186476. Okay, looks correct. Based on the single filing, let me just try another one. Let's say Jim, and then 2, and then 186476. Okay, yeah, you can see now it's Mary filing. So as far as the output is concerned, you cannot really tell which code is which, but the output is both correct. I just somehow to change the internal structure of your code to make it simplified, to make it much simpler. So I think certainly you might start with the most naive version as I show, but later on when you realize there's so much repetition there in your code, that's actually gradually how you can make your code simpler. Okay. Okay, any questions about this part here? You can see the code is much simpler. Okay, right? And much more readable. Okay. Any questions about this before I move on? No? Okay, I'll make both versions available on the web, and I'll let you know so you can also study that. Okay. But certainly you don't have to write complicated stuff like that in the quiz. That'll be too complicated. But certainly there'll be some stuff that's worth learning. Okay, I'll stop the recording here, and then we'll move on to something else.